حي على الفلاح.
We're just going to talk about something that the Sunnis or other people from maybe a non-Muslim perspective would think about when they think about Shia. So what they think about is things like mota marriage, which is maybe temporary marriage, taqiyya, which is the ability for, or the allowance for Shia to be able to lie in certain situations, and maybe potentially the Mahdi for the Shia, who's obviously different in character and description than the Mahdi for the Sunnis. And potentially they might be acquainted with the fact that Shias believe that Ali should have been the successor to the Prophet, and Sunnis believe that Abu Bakr should have been the successor to the Prophet. When people think about the differences between Sunni and Shia, these are the kind of things that come into or crop into your mind. I want to say something to you guys. I think these are not actually the primary differences between Sunni and Shia. The primary differences between Sunni and Shia, I would say, Wallahu A'lam, are three. Number one is the status of the Quran. Number two is the Sahaba. And number three, Imamah. These are three things which I would say are the pillars of difference between Sunnis and Shia. So I'm mentioning these things not to cause a fitna or corruption in the land or something like this. I'm mentioning these things because it's the right of the consumer to understand these differences when conceptualizing Islam in general. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about quickly is the Quran. Now, the Quran clearly is, Muslims believe, sent down to the Prophet Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, etc. I have to be honest that when you look into the classical Shia scholarship, it's very clear that there's a difference of opinion between the scholars in the Shia school of thought, especially the 12th Shia school of thought, as it relates to the preservation of the Quran. So there are these who take the Islamic position that the Quran is preserved and sent down to the Prophet, and those Shia who basically don't take the Islamic position, and this is in their scholarship, and they don't basically believe that the Quran is preserved because they don't see that the Sahaba or the companions have done a good job in preserving the Quran. Clearly now, those who have the opinion that the Quran is preserved, which I genuinely believe are the majority, we can then talk about the second thing which we're going to segue into now with a bit more conviction. Number two here is the status of the Sahaba. The Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet. Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah describe a Sahabi as someone who has met the Prophet and he was a Muslim or she was a Muslim and then died upon this, i.e. Islam. Now, from a Sunni perspective, the Sahaba are seen as the transmitters of the revelation, but both the Quran and the Sunnah. If we do take the Shia position, which I'm going to outline in a second, then we would, if we take our skeptical extreme to its max, we could actually say that the Quran would be corrupted. But having said this, what do the Shia say? If you look at Al-Kafi, which is the second most authoritative book for Shia, you'll find that it says in Al-Kafi, the companions of the Prophet, that they were apostates except for three, and they mention who the three are, and they say it was Al-Miqdad, and it was Abu al-Ghifari, and it was Salman al-Farisi. These are the three companions which are not apostates according to the Shia tradition, of course, in addition to Ahlul Bayt, who are the immediate family of the Prophet, who they would say is Hassan, Hussein, Fatima, etc. Now, these are big differences here, because once again, if you concede that the Sahaba are kuffar, and this is exactly what one of the Shia scholars says in one of his books, and he entitled one of the chapters Kufr al-Thalatha. Some Shias make specific takfir to Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman. They make specific takfir to these three, meaning that they say that these people are not Muslims because they usurped Ali from his rightful the successorship of the Prophet. This is basically the Shia position. So once again, if you take this position, you could fall into the first category of people who denied the Quran's preservation. But in addition to that, there are lots of other problems. Like, for example, if you look at the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he didn't come out and say to these three successors, to Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman, that I believe you are kuffar. And this is not in their books, and neither is in our books. I mean, if you look carefully, he actually prays behind those people. And in Islam, if you pray behind the disbeliever, your prayer is invalid. In fact, more than that, Ali had two sons. He had more than two sons, sorry, but I mean, two sons who he specifically named Abu Bakr and Umar. In addition to that, Ali had married his daughter to Umar ibn al-Khattab, Kulthum. So he married her off to this man. And clearly, if this was a disbeliever, then it wouldn't be a legitimate marriage in Islam. These are some things which Sunnis would reply, say, look, this is the issue with your thesis, or the thesis that the Sahaba are not basically Muslim. Having said this, also the Quran makes it clear. If we look at Surah Al-Fath, chapter number 48 of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, he says, Allah is pleased with those people who have made bay'ah to you under the tree. Bay'ah means the pledge of allegiance. And there's no difference of opinion that these individuals included Uthman and included Abu Bakr and these big names that basically the Sunnis take as big names, and the Shias, some of them, I would say, quite openly excommunicate from the faith altogether. And there are other verses, like in the final verse of that very chapter, chapter 48, it says Muhammad Rasulullah, and the ones who have believed with him are good traits, we would say, of the Sahaba. Having said that, having spoken about the second major difference, I'll talk now about the third major difference. The third major difference is, and it's a very big one, imamah. Now, imamah, if you look at the Islamic tradition, you'll find that Muslims all agree there are 6 pillars of iman. There are 5 pillars of Islam, 6 pillars of iman. That you believe in Allah and His angels and His messengers, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, there are 6 pillars of iman, which is faith. Now, we would consider these 6 pillars of faith as you would say the pillars or the foundations of our creedal belief. Shias now have an addition to this. What they say is that we believe in imamah. Imamah is the idea that there are 12 imams. Imams means, kind of linguistically means leaders or people to be followed. There are 12 imams beginning with Ali ibn Abi Talib and ending with Muhammad ibn Hassan Askari, that all of these 12 imams are, number 1, infallible, that they're incapable of making mistakes. Number 2, that they have all knowledge. Number 3, that they can control of the dharrat, even the atoms of creation, they can have control of it, and so on and so forth. So these 12 imams, according to the Shia, are incredibly perfect. They are perfect in every way, shape and form, and we have to follow them, according to Shias, in order to get salvation. Now, the question that Sunnis pose to Shias now is, if we look at the Quran, from the beginning of the Quran to the end of the Quran, we will find many mentions, not just one mention, but many mentions of all of the foundational elements of Aqidah or faith. But when you try and do the same thing for Imamah, the question now is, where does the Quran mention Imamah? From the beginning of it to the end of it. Now clearly, these may be classical-minded Shias, Orthodox Shias, or whatever you want to call them. They will say maybe the Quran is not preserved. The original Quran had 18,000 verses, and therefore, that those verses that talk about Imamah have been lifted. But for those Shias who maintain that the Quran is preserved and that the Quran has not been changed, which hopefully I will say is the majority, the question now is, how would they respond to the fact that Imamah, or the idea of the leadership of the 12, is not mentioned anywhere in the Quran in any explicit way at all? And this is very, very clear for all to see. So this is a question that Sunnis have been historically posing to Shias for a very, very long time, and Shias have been grappling with it, and you could say that they've been referencing some ayat, maybe in Surah Al-Ma'idah, some ayat in other places which have vague references or ambiguous references, which are not clear and definitely don't mention any of the names of any of the 12 Imams, beginning from Ali ibn Abi Talib and ending with Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari. But having said this, the question now would be, where did the idea come from? that one theory, according to some people, Shia and Sunnah actually, idea of Imam actually came from a human being called Abdullah ibn Saba. And I hope the Shia, if you're watching this, you're not going to switch off and get angry, because I know you've heard this probably before. Okay, I know you've heard this before. I'm not trying to say that it's true or it's false. I'm just saying it's an idea. It's in the scholarly works of Shias and Sunnah. For example, Abdullah ibn Saba has been said by someone called Al-Qummi, who is a Shia scholar, who wrote a book called Firaq al-Shia. This is exactly what he says in page 32. He says that he, i.e. Abdullah bin Saba, is the first person to say that it's obligatory to believe in the imamah, and he uses exactly the word imamah of Ali, and he says alayhi salam because he is a Shia, and there have been Sunnis who have said the same thing. Alayhi salam is not necessarily something I'm attacking anyone on. He is the first person to really show animosity against those people who he says are the enemies of Ali, who he's referring to obviously Umar, Abu Bakr, etc. And this is one theory, and certainly it's been mentioned by Sunnis and Shia. But there are other theories, and I'm not here to have a complete discussion about that. But it's important for us to know not only the differences, but perhaps where the differences came from as well. But another issue is really a creedal issue. If we say that the Imam, for example, knows everything, this is what Al-Khomeini says, this is what many of the scholars, classical and contemporary, have said about the Imams. They know everything. If this is the case, and some Sunnis have argued, then would that suggest that they are more knowledge than the Prophet Muhammad? So I'll say no, in fact the Prophet Muhammad knows everything as well. Say, okay, fine. Let's take this and let's put it to the standard of the Quran. You see the Quran in chapter number 46, verse number 8, it says, to the Prophet Muhammad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says to the Prophet Muhammad, say I'm not an innovation of the Prophet, so I'm not something new, not coming with a new message, and I don't know what's going to happen to me, and I don't know what's going to happen to you. So he says, I don't know something. For example, chapter 79 of the Quran, the last couple of verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they ask you about the hour, when will it be pegged? Say, who are you? Who are you, O Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to know this kind of information? It says that we haven't taught him shi'r, which means poetry. So there's lots of things the Prophet doesn't know. The question would then remain, if we're saying that the Imams know everything, and that Allah knows everything, then does that mean that the Imams have the same knowledge as Allah? Or not? But this is another argument that Sunnis put forward. Now, the Shia does have a counter to this, just to be clear, and remember this is an education video. If we say that Allah knows everything and that the Imams know everything, that would suggest that they have the same knowledge. Now, the Shia would come about and say, look, actually that's not true. You're conceptualizing it incorrectly. So why? The reason why, actually there's something that Allah has that the Imams don't have, which is what you call Samadiyya. A Samad means that everything relies upon Allah and Allah doesn't rely upon anyone. Whereas the Imams all rely upon Allah, and Allah does not rely upon the Imams. That's what they say. This is a clear difference. This is what differentiates the Imams from the Prophet Muhammad and from the Imams. So fine. But that does not negate the fact that you are saying that they have the same knowledge. Just because one is more reliant than the other, or one is reliant on the other and the other is not reliant on one, doesn't mean that they don't have the same knowledge if you subscribe to this belief. So this is the kind of discussion you'll find between Sunni and Shia. This is the traditional discussion that's been going on for many hundreds of, and it's important for us as consumers of the truth to have an understanding of that. I hope you haven't offended anybody. I just genuinely did this because I felt there was a need to educate people.